What is the value of black and white? Today I'm going to be sharing with you an experiment in completely getting away from color. I wanted to do something that was more than a drawing, but didn't have all the stress of an oil painting, where I could not have to worry about color, enjoy incorporating some line work, and see where it took me. I have designed a number of pieces that I'd like to explore doing in just black and white, and I started with this piece that was really just inspired by seeing something that had this beautiful lattice Chinese or Asian themed window work, and I was riffing on that, and I designed this piece around that and developed this character for it. And it's a simple iconic pose to execute this first attempt at developing this technique. Now what I'm showing you here is nothing I came up with on my own. This is through osmosis from seeing various other artists working in ink wash, in graphite, in colored pencil, doing mixed media work, and I wanted to incorporate some of that into this piece. Now if you're familiar with my channel, you would see that the majority of my final work is done in oil, but I wanted the opportunity to be able to step back from that for a minute, and instead of doing a full rendering in graphite, I wanted the chance to play with mixed media and utilize ink and ink wash to get to a full value statement faster than just graphite would get me. I designed this entire piece in Photoshop, and I'm currently working on top of a very light transfer and reinforcing all of my line work with colored pencil, Prismacolor Color Erase pencil, and some 2H graphite pencils. Now what I've noticed in my own oil work, I am getting more and more removed from color in general, or at least high chroma. I'm really developing a taste for work that is much more grayed down, and this allowed me to just completely ignore color altogether. And once I have my clean line work established, then I can go in and just lay in a base tone of a very light ink wash. Now I know from the get-go that I can pretty much go over everything because very little of this piece is going to be pure white. So that allows me the freedom for putting a wash over more or less the whole thing and just preserving a few areas. And I don't even need to stress about preserving some of those whites like a purist, because I can go over some of those areas with acrylic ink, white acrylic ink, which I'll be doing towards the end. Now because this is more of an experiment in mixed media, I don't have a linear process of what comes first, second and third in terms of procedure on this piece. I've sort of gone back and forth, laying in some value with some colored pencil and then reinforcing that with some ink wash. I felt almost quite timid doing this, and as the pencil, either graphite or colored pencil, gives you more control over subtlety of value, whereas the ink, as soon as it's down, and unless you add some water very quickly and move it around, it's not going anywhere. So coming in with some pencil first allowed me to creep into my value structure, and then once I was happy with some things that I had established, then I could reinforce that with some washes and make things slightly darker. I wanted to start in with this face as it was the focal point of the entire piece, and this was going to be giving me a keystone or grounding as to the value structure of the entire painting. Now there were lots of things that I was really trying to keep in mind throughout this entire process, but one thing in particular was something that I've heard referred to as value graphics. Now that's in reference to the intrinsic value of particular objects and materials. For example, so my main subject is a woman of Asian origin or of perhaps Chinese descent, and so she has very rich dark black hair. And so because of that, I know that the highest key highlight on her hair isn't going to be anywhere near white. If I were to use white as a highlight on her hair, that would be a stylistic choice, but it wouldn't really be a realistic choice. The highest value that her hair will hit if a light is shining right on it is going to be maybe a mid-tone gray, so that already allows me to go quite dark on her hair structure. and her skin tone is going to be considerably lighter than that. And then I can think of the various materials of her clothing, and that will allow me to create a value structure around the entire figure. The overall lighting for this piece was inspired by one of my most favorite artists, a French academic painter called William Adolphe Bouguereau. Now, Bouguereau was incredibly well known for doing ambient lighting or indirect lighting. So normally when we're learning, it's incredibly useful to use a single direct light source so that we can see clear form of a light side, a dark side, shadow, core shadow. It's a very good way to learn and understand form. With ambient or indirect lighting, it's an infinitely more subtle way to describe the form, especially in black and white, because when you at least have color, you're going to be relying on temperature to turn form. Within black and white, you're going to have a more subtle rounding of areas, and you're not going to have a direct highlight and shadow side on things. It's going to be much more subtle. And here you'll see just an example dropping down of a couple of his paintings which inspired this lighting scheme. So why would we ever want to paint in black and white? It's a big problem for developing artists especially. They always want to know, what color should I buy? What color should I use for that? What color should I use for that? How do I paint flesh tones? That's a big problem. New artists always obsessed with learning how to paint flesh tones. Older artists always want to make better flesh tones. With any painting, when you start, you have a number of problems that you have to solve. The design, the composition, the structure, the lighting, the color. If you ignore color, that's one problem out the window already. And all of a sudden, flesh tones don't exist. The color of the skin, the colors in the skin are the same colors in everything else. Nothing. So that's a problem gone. And perhaps it's just my perception, but especially within the realms of oil painting, I think tonal or black and white painting seems to be perceived as a lesser standard as a full color painting. But if you think about it, when we think of photography, black and white photographers have an enormous, historically, amount of clout and are thought of as quite highly. Maybe one of the most famous black and white photographers is Ansel Adams. I'm not a huge person for photography, but I'm fairly well aware that black and white photography is a thing and that lots of people appreciate. So why not black and white painting? Now something like this, which is a relatively small piece, it's 15 by 20, it's mixed media, it's, as I've said before, it's mostly colored pencil and ink wash. Doing something like this, for me personally, is much faster than doing a full oil painting if I were to do this as an oil painting. Doing an oil painting of this subject at this size would be fairly tedious. I mean, you've seen me on this channel paint very small faces before, but given the subject matter and the amount of stuff in this composition, were I to do this as an oil painting, I would invest more time and effort into doing it at a larger scale. On the other hand, what I have when I have finished this piece is a full value rendition of what could be potentially used as a preliminary study for a larger painting. Because once I have this, once it's completed, all I need to do is assign a color to the value that I have on this, and I have a preliminary study that I could then turn into a full color painting, which I may do down the line. In another video perhaps, I might scale this up, do a color study of this, and do a full oil painting rendition. But going back to what I said about how whenever you start something you have a number of problems to solve, by not thinking about color lets me dig deeper into the other aspects of the piece. For example, we're getting in now to the design of her clothing. I could have just had plain drapery of all the various elements. It could have just been a single flat, for lack of a better word, color or intrinsic value, and gradiated depending on how the light is hitting it. But this allowed me to incorporate a bit of a design into her clothing. So I wanted to have this dragon pattern weaving around her sleeves, and as we get into the lower portion, it would be around the skirt area of the clothing. And to really play with the subtle value shifts from the, as I said, intrinsic value of the skirt to the subtle adjustment of the design pattern that's weaving around it. But as you see it start to develop, as we get into the lower half here, there is going to be this value compression throughout the whole piece. And what I mean by that is, I have done my absolute best to make sure that nothing is out of place. I have designed the lighting structure so that the highest point of contrast is going to be around her head. Her hair is going to be the darkest thing in the painting, and behind her, the sky is going to be the lightest thing in the painting. In the lower half, you'll have light on dark and light on dark, but you're not going to have any distracting elements that are going to create so much contrast that they're going to pull you away from the attention that the focal point is demanding. This is a really important point I want to make about establishing a focus in your piece, whatever the subject may be. Depending on the subject, it is easier to do that than in others. For example, I have a pretty simple composition here of a character with effectively a big bright shape behind her to draw attention to the face, and there are a few subsidiary elements. You know, if this was a play, you don't want to have a bunch of puppies running on stage, all demanding your attention at once. You need to shepherd the elements around your piece like sheep, all organized into their specific pens, doing a very specific job. And no element should be upstaging another where you want to draw the main attention of the viewer. And really the best way to achieve that, I think, is through proper planning. I'm actually a part of a couple of oil painting Facebook groups, and I've heard or read questions that people pose, and so often they say, how do I improve this? They share their piece, how do I fix this? How do I fix that? No matter what medium you're working in, I feel as though so often people don't have a problem. They might have a problem with their medium, but more often than not, they have a picture making problem. Whether it's digital, whether it's graphite, oil, watercolor, whatever. They haven't solved the problems of the assemblance of the picture. They've got puppies running on stage. They haven't considered the background. They haven't considered the anatomy, the structure. They are struggling with pictorial problems, and they think that it's a medium problem. They think that it's a specific problem with their oil paint, with their ink, with their pencil, with their whatever. When you plan out a piece first, I'm maybe getting off topic here from the specifics of this, but it is really relevant to this because I spent actually 3 days planning it before ever touching the final materials that I was going to be making it with. And in doing that, all I had to think about when doing this was execution, was making it look good. Literally the only thing I had to think about whilst doing this were the materials, because I had my composition planned out, I had my costuming planned out, I had my design, my lighting, everything. So literally the only problems I have left are the handling of the materials, and that is the case for whatever it may be. If I'd have been doing this in oil and I'd done the same level of planning, all I would have to be thinking about during this is the actual medium, if this was in oil or if whatever, because I've solved all of my other problems. The only thing I have to do now is not mess it up. It's just to do a good job because I planned it all. Now you may say, but Daniel, where's the spontaneity? Where's the soul of creativity or some garbage like that? And I would say, if you are so seasoned at this, if you are really that good that you can solve all the problems at once of composition, storytelling, lighting, value structure, anatomy, landscape, character design, costume design, all of it at once on the surface without any preliminary planning, I salute you. You're amazing. You're better than me. You're better than most people. Congratulations. But if you're not able to do that, and you wonder why you keep getting frustrated with those paintings, you can't figure out how to finish, and you don't know what background color to do, or you don't know what color to do for this, or you don't know how to resolve that, maybe do some proper planning first. Now, is this a foolproof means to success? Hell no! Do I mess up work? All the time. I have planned some things to Kingdom Come, and I've still messed it up because it just wasn't right. It just wasn't working, and I had to redesign things on the fly, or I had to step away, do a smaller study, figure out an area, rejig an area, photograph it, bring into Photoshop, mess around with it, then get back onto the real piece, fix it up. I've done that more times than I like to count, and in all likelihood, it'll probably happen again. But doing as much planning as possible will reduce the stress during it, will reduce the number of problems that you have in the first place, will increase the likelihood that it will come out well. Now, actually, right now you'll see me working on one of the more stressful areas for me, which is these little leaves and vines that I've incorporated. For some reason, personally, I find organic shapes very challenging. My brain just doesn't mesh well with them. I really love incorporating them into my work when they're appropriate, and I thought they're appropriate here. But yes, designing leaves is a weak spot for me personally. In oil, I can indicate them with brushwork, but when actually having to design out specific ones and draw them out and create a value structure around them, that I find particularly challenging, but I did my best in this area. Coming into the latter stage of this painting, I'm going to be now working with the white acrylic ink into the background to really brighten up that area. The problem I have with this point is the surface that I'm working on is hot press illustration board, and it's white board, and it's a eggshell warm white. The ink is bright white, and it's very, very cold in temperature, and I have this odd contrast between the cold white ink and the warmish white paper. So to get around that, I actually have to do a very thin wash of that ink across the entire sky surface in order for it to mesh well, because just to my taste, it seemed far too disjointed to have a few swatches of that white laid down. I feel as though there needed to be a smoother gradient transition using that white acrylic ink, and it is thickest and most opaque near her face, but it is to some degree covering all of the sky that is receding behind the mountain there. And also notice now with the sky and the mountain, I have further focused the attention around her face by almost creating this L-shaped composition within that larger O shape that the window is taking up behind her. Now, one of the very last things I'm doing here is doing a glaze of acrylic matte medium and just straight black acrylic heavy body paint. Prior to doing this, I have completely sealed the surface with a diluted spray of water and matte medium. I have sprayed it onto the surface with just a small spray bottle so that everything is completely fixed. And I am now going over and really darkening up some areas like her hair and making some subtle adjustments on her clothing with that, as I said, very thin down medium of acrylic matte medium and black heavy body paint. And these are the final touches. Thank you very much for watching this far into the video. I hope you've enjoyed seeing this process of me doing this experiment, and I hope to do a few more pieces like this, maybe not the exact same process, but more black and white work in the future. Now, if you'd like, you can go over to my Patreon, where you'll see an extended version of this video, me going through the entire process, tackling each various element of the piece. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back in just a couple of weeks with another video for another painting. Thanks again, everyone. Bye bye.